Perfect. And that down there. This up here. That there. Okay, we're live. Okay, so it is generally the norm that primates have 4 types of teeth. There are some exceptions. A few prosimians have lost one or another tooth type entirely. Okay, so they will lack them. That is the case, for example, with this creature here. These are the jaws of 3 different primates. And what this overhead is illustrating is that although primates have a variety of tooth types in order to allow them to best process a variety of foods, their teeth will still differ from each other on the basis of what their principal food is. It's sort of like Darwin's finch's beaks, right? So if they have a primary food, their teeth will be adapted to process that primary food type, okay? So these 3 each have a different primary food type, and it's reflected in their dental morphology. This creature, which they're not all drawn to scale, like this animal is very, very small. This is an insectivore. It has very sharp pointed teeth, particularly in the front, but even its molars have little points on top of them. And it has those pointy teeth so it can kind of crunch through the little, grasshopper exoskeleton as it's eating. This is a foliivore, which is a creature that eats leaves, and it has high shearing blades on its teeth in order to strip leaves off of a twig or branch. This, incidentally, was a tarsier, and this is an indri. And the indri is missing a type of tooth altogether. It doesn't have any carnivores. So I is incisors, C is carnivore, P premolar, M molar. So if you have an indri, you know that your indri has a 2033 dental pattern, which means you would not put yes for the question that is on the primate assignment. Okay. This is a frugivore. It's a type of a mangabe, which is a monkey that lives in Central Africa. And its teeth, its incisors in particular, have behind the front of them a kind of scooped, they have like a scoop to them. And when it bites into fruit, it pulls the fruit off of the seed when it eats it. And its teeth act as kind of scoops for the food that it's eating, its front teeth in particular. It has canines. They're primarily for weaponry for males. They're not particularly sharp compared to some other monkeys, and its molars are pretty flat, although they have parallel ridges for chewing, which is sort of normal. That's how our molars are as well. Okay. Our front teeth, our incisors, have a little bit of the same shape to them too, generally speaking, although interestingly it varies by population. Different groups of people tend to have teeth that are a little bit more shovel-shaped like that. Vision. Let me turn off the light so you can see better, speaking of vision. Here's marmoset. Primates have forward-facing eyes, you know that. The function of having 2 eyes side by side that give you slightly different perspectives on the world, which is sometimes referred to as binocular vision, is to give depth perception. There are 2 hypotheses about the evolutionary origins of depth perception among primates as to why it would be something that's important for primates to have. One of them is known as the arboreal hypothesis, which is that life in the trees requires that you have good depth perception, because if you don't, you run into branches and trunks. So you have to see where you're going, especially if you move fairly quickly. And the other one is called the predation hypothesis, which is that most predators we know from the natural world have eyes in the front of their head because this actually enables them to focus on prey as it's moving, and that also is something that requires good depth perception. The 2 hypotheses are actually championed by different scholars, but they're not mutually exclusive. They could both be true, basically, provided, of course, that the human and primate in general ancestor that existed a long time ago was an arboreal predator, which in the case of our ancestral form, at least the fossil evidence suggests, would probably have been an insectivorous predator, arboreal insectivore, sort of like the tarsier in the previous slide, although not morphologically the same, but the same feeding adaptation. There is less reliance among primates on a sense of smell. This is more true of anthropoids than it is of prosimians. And it's more true of catarrhines, and more true of apes, and more true of you. Generally speaking, color vision is a characteristic of diurnal primates. Nocturnals lack true color vision, but in fact, it varies. It is probably the case that all catarrhines have true color vision, which is sometimes called three-color or tricolor vision. The current hypothesis about the evolution of trichromatic vision in primates is that it would be coevolutionarily related to the consumption of fruit. So in the same way that we talked about with pollinators like bees co-evolving with the flowers they pollinate, so the flower says, look, I'm a flower, come pollinate me, and the bee is able to receive that signal, or whatever pollinator it is. Some pollinators receive signals by scent, some by vision. Not all can do both. So if you're going to appeal to a pollinator, you better appeal to it in a way that it can actually appreciate. Well, the fact that primates often have true color vision, catarrhines do in general, is thought to be related to the fact that it is the norm for fruit to signal its presence visually to its seed dispersers, they are referred to, because they eat the fruit and then disperse the seeds. And therefore, if you're signaling your fruit by, let us say, red color on a green background, that would require that your seed dispersers have trichromatic vision in order to see the fruit. Okay? And I think there was a demonstration to some extent of the same sort of fact in the Social Climbers film when he showed different batches of leaves, and then that camera sort of turned the scene black and white to show you that it's difficult to discern the right leaves if you don't have color vision. There are actually three different types of vision, not two. Most people think in terms of like a color movie and a black and white movie, but basically there's trichromatic, dichromatic, and monochromatic. And only with trichromatic can you make true distinctions between reds and greens very easily. You lose that ability in dichromatic vision. Now, we do know that there's a high incidence of color blindness among males because part of the genes that control your ability to see true trichromatic color are found on your X chromosome, and males only have one copy of the X, and that means if you've got a bum copy, then you end up with color blindness, right? Interestingly, there's a similar pattern among some species where females will have a higher percentage of the female population that's able to see trichromatically, but then the male population, or a higher percentage of it, will not have that ability. This is a very interesting fact from an evolutionary perspective. It shows a couple of things. One is that the evolution of trichromatic vision among some species, and the research shows this is principally true of certain species of marmosets and tamarins, where males will not have the ability to see in color to the same extent that females do, right? The evolution of that color vision is something that's still in process, meaning that the trait has not become ubiquitous among both sexes in the population, okay? That may never be the case if it doesn't pose a great advantage. On the other hand, it would appear to pose an advantage. It may also be, the other thing that's sort of interesting about this from an evolutionary perspective is that it may also be the case that it is more important for the females to have that ability because of their need for resources, particularly among species that produce twins, which are resource demanding for females, right? So it may be that for a variety of reasons, social life being one of them, right, it's okay for a male not to have the kind of color vision a female has, right? Remember what we saw in the film with the Social Climbers. The female tamarin takes off to go find her own food so she can feed a lot while she's nursing the twins. So she's off foraging alone, right? So she has that color vision to find the food that she needs, and she needs a lot of food. If you're a male and you're foraging, it may not be so important for you to get the food, but it also may be the case that you're foraging in social groups, right? So say you don't have color vision and you do, you're okay to find the cherries or whatever it is you're looking for. I mean, they wouldn't be cherries, but let's say the fruit that she can see, provided that she was around, because you could sort of follow her, and if she saw fruit, then you could just kind of go along with her. And in that case, maybe it wouldn't be such a big disadvantage to not have color vision because you're in a social group. But if you're foraging alone, it would be a bigger disadvantage. And you have more resource needs because you're trying to feed your young. So there may be something going on here with a kind of dimorphic trait in terms of vision between the sexes in some of these species. It's not common in primates in general, but it has been documented among more than a couple species of marmosets and tamarins. So anyway, there you go. That's vision. The primate life course has some remarkable things about it as well. We are unusual, even by mammal standards. We're very much mammals, but we're extreme mammals, is the best way to think of us. We have long periods of gestation. It takes a long time for mammals to give birth. Generally speaking, this correlates to body size. So the longest birth interval, or the longest gestation period actually for any terrestrial animal is elephants, and lasts 24 months or something like that, a couple of years, right? But in general, for our body size, mammals have long periods of gestation. Okay, it takes us a long time from conception to actually be born. We have reduced numbers of offspring. This is true of mammals in general, but it's more true of primates. So your dog will have a few puppies, but your sister will probably only have one. You call my sister a dog? No, I love your sister. We also have delayed maturation, which means it takes us a long time to grow up. So you get born, you're born prematurely, got to get your big head out of there. Then you're going to have to grow for a while before you can actually do stuff on your own. Humans have the most dependent offspring. Takes human children, I mean, it depends who you talk to, but probably about 8 years, 8 or 9 years is when human children are considered independent. I mean, yeah, they can't drive a car or drink a cocktail, but generally by that age they can kind of function fairly well. Orangutans are next, but all the great apes have long periods of dependency and maturation. We have an extension of the entire lifespan as well, so it takes us a long time to develop, a long time to mature, and then we live longer because of that. And there's a couple reasons for that. The whole process takes a long time, it's true. But if you think about it, if primates are dependent on their parents for 7 or 8 years, you would expect natural selection would favor a period of time where females were caring for those offspring during their dependency period. All right? This is actually the evolutionary explanation for menopause. Why is it, for example, that human women have a period in their lives where they're non-reproductive? This is a very important question from the perspective of natural selection, because you would think if natural selection is about maximizing survival and reproduction, that for humans to evolve something like menopause makes no sense at all. Females should be having offspring all the way up to the moment that they die, right? And yet the one explanation for it is, and there's a debate among researchers about the evolutionary function of menopause, but one explanation is that a female needs to have a period at the end of her life where she's not having any more offspring so she can ensure the ones that she's had of reaching maturity. And then when she dies, it's okay. I mean, not emotionally, obviously, but it's okay for her offspring because they've attained a level of independence. Okay? That's just one explanation. Menopause is a strangely hot topic in evolutionary theory. Turns out that most primates don't actually have this. It's interesting. It seems to be primarily a human thing, although it's now been documented among chimps that live a long time in captivity. So, and then there's also the fact that historically, before you have Western medicine evolve, people on average did not live that long. So menopause itself might simply be something that is part of the sort of evolutionary, or part of the recent extension of the lifespan made possible by human culture and the discovery of medicine. Your average woman didn't last until 80. In fact, almost none of them did, right? You know, we know from the fossil record, all the fossils we have of ancient hominids were all dead by the time they were 40. All of them. None of them lived past 40. And we know from studies of human populations that did not have medical care, that life expectancy was, in some places in the low 20s. That's mainly because a lot of humans die in infancy, so that brings the whole average down. But even still, women living to old age were so rare. Another interesting thing about menopause, why I'm on the topic, is that it happens to different women at very different points in the lifespan. Some women go through menopause quite early as early 40s, right? Other women, it doesn't happen to them until they're in their 60s, which gives us the appearance that, it gives menopause the appearance of being something that probably is not completely resolved in terms of its evolution, because it happens at such radically different times in different women's lives. And it has something to do with nutrition and all of that. But nevertheless, if it was really something that had a strong selection pressure on it for any particular reason, you would expect it to happen at the same time in women's lives all over the world. And that's not how it turns out to be the case. The fact that it happens at different times in women's lives kind of supports the notion that maybe most women were dead by the time it happened anyway, so it wasn't that big of a deal, as it were. The other reason why I don't like the hypothesis that the woman needs a period at the end of her life to actually raise the offspring is that humans have alloparenting, which means that if parents of a small child die, other humans can take care of that small child. Right? In fact, we adopt children, which other species don't do exactly. But, the idea that if the mother didn't live, because she had some baby at a late age, and there was no such thing as menopause, and women were having babies all the way up until, whenever they died naturally anyway, someone else could take care of that kid. So how do you explain that with this hypothesis that, that's there to ensure that the offspring will survive their period of dependence on their parents, right? Which could have still been a factor, but I'm not totally convinced. As you can see, I'm very into menopause myself. Finally, to summarize this, primates have birth rates, death rates, and growth rates of between 25 and 50% of same-sized mammals, which essentially is another way of saying that we have fewer offspring, we live longer, and we develop slower than even comparably sized mammals. You always have to account for body size because so many of these variables are influenced by body size. And if all of that's too boring and scientific for you, there's a picture of a cute baby gorilla just to keep you entertained. I know, it's much more G-rated than my picture of two pandas having sex, which I think was staged anyway. Panda porn, the next big thing. Are we good? Yes, please.
Do you think that menopause is a way of ensuring that people do not have children past a certain age, considering that most people who are having children later in life are also noticing a rise in birth defects and autism as well as disabilities?
Yes, there are people who also assert this opinion, right? That, basically as both parents get older, you have a rise in a variety. I mean, it's a large list, right? But Down syndrome, one we talked about in class, autism, there's a lot of them. This is actually also true for men. So we tend to blame women for this, which isn't really fair because it's true for men as well. But it's more, the age of the mother, the birth age of the mother is more important in the whole process. So it's been argued that menopause is an evolutionary adaptation to prevent birth defects in the same way that so-called spontaneous abortion is, which I've never favored that term much, but the idea that such a large number of pregnancies that human women have are not carried to term, right, is actually an adaptive mechanism to ensure healthy children. I mean, of course, it's tragic emotionally. It's always, detached science around here. But this could very well be the same sort of thing. And that's a pretty convincing argument. But that's another piece in the whole menopause puzzle for sure, definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. I didn't mention it. Primate learning and behavior. Now, the thing about mammals is that we're smarter. This is true of mammals in general. There are some smart non-mammals. Octopi are pretty intelligent. And there's some pretty dumb mammals too, like my dog, Carlos, who's not too smart. But in general, mammals are smarter, and they have a greater dependence on flexible and learned behaviors. And that's part of what's necessary to succeed as a mammal, but also a primate. Again, this idea of social intelligence means that you've got to assess the intentions of others around you. Are they friend or foe? And you have to measure that and be fairly certain of that. You know, that's what instinct is. How do you feel about someone? Oh, I don't trust that guy. Really, why? I'm not sure. You know, but it doesn't matter if you're sure, because your instinct that he's untrustworthy is probably you picking up on very real signals. Okay? I'm a scientist, but I completely believe, quote, believe in instinct. I think your instincts about people are quite worth following most of the time. And humans are very good, because of their social intelligence, at figuring out whether other people can be trusted or not, or what someone's offering you is a good thing or a bad thing. Is someone trying to take advantage of you? You know in your gut when somebody's trying to take advantage of you, and you should go with those feelings because you're no doubt right. That's part of your intelligence. That's part of what it takes to get by as a human, and you have that ability, you have that quality. It translates to a lot of other things that you're able to do, like take this class and learn this subject or whatever it is, right? That's flexible learned behavior too. But it's important for other primates, not just humans, and not just Kanzi the bonobo, who's one of those great ape language experiments. He's a famous one. Kanzi would be a good paper, actually. There's a lot on Kanzi. Life in social groups. Look Kanzi up on YouTube. There's some good videos of Kanzi. He's not a signer, uses this board to communicate information, but he understands commands really well, so when they tell him to do stuff, he can do it. And not just like your dog, your dog responds automatically. Kanzi actually has some level of comprehension, like you can create novel sentences and he gets it and does what you're telling him to do. So he's pretty good. It's like Coco, but actually I think in a head-to-head smackdown, Kanzi's ability would exceed Coco's. Bonobos and chimps are smarter than gorillas, not to take anything away from Coco, who's, quite sweet. I like the way she's signed, and there's the sad story about the kitten, which everyone loves. But Coco's kind of a prude. She's kind of cold. She wouldn't mate with any. They brought in, I don't even know how many male gorillas, and she wouldn't touch a single one of them. There was actually a hypothesis that Coco was a lesbian for a while. And although she did react favorably to male gorillas on television, but then when they bring the ones in, they showed her like they did video dating with Coco. They would make movies of these male gorillas, show them to her, and see how they reacted. In fact, there was the famous employee, right, of Francine Patterson, as the woman who handles Coco, that sued Francine Patterson. Did I tell you this? No. This is one of my favorite stories. I don't know why, because I'm an idiot, but. This woman Francine Patterson was Coco wouldn't look at any males. She rejected all the male gorillas they brought her. And so Francine Patterson, who's her handler, who's like sort of staunchly defended her language abilities in print to the consternation of skeptics, decided that what they needed to do was foster her nurturing instincts. So she started asking her employees to behave in very motherly ways, thinking that this might trigger Coco's own mothering instincts, which might in turn make her interested in boys. And it got to the point where Francine Patterson was asking her female employees to work around Coco topless, because this was supposedly going to help Coco's maternal instincts, right? And one of the employees sued for sexual harassment because she was required on the job to work without any clothes on. I think it had to be settled. I can't remember. I remember reading about it. She probably settled it out of court, but it was just like, what? Yeah, I know. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? It's like, what was Francine Pedersen thinking? You know, you have to be. This is one of those times you should go with your gut instinct. Actually, when your employer asks you to take your clothes off to help develop the nurturing instinct of the gorilla you work with, there might be something more to it. I think. I'm just saying, not to be cynical. Francine Pedersen is a lovely person. This is Sue Savage Rumbaugh, who's the main caretaker for Kanzi. Kanzi's biggest problem at this point is that he's fat as a house. The problem with being a captive, you know, especially as you get older, right? See, that's the thing. You'll know this when you guys all get older, you get fatter, right? Like I'm 46, and now I can't ever eat because I just, you know, my clothes don't fit anymore or whatever. So, but the same thing happened to Kanzi. If you look at an old picture of Kanzi, go on YouTube and look at like an old video of Kanzi doing his thing, and then fast forward to like the last couple of years. I mean, he's enormous. Old, 40? I might be wrong, but I think he's probably late 30s. Actually, you know, he's probably 30 to 35. He's not quite that. He's not really old. They don't, you know, the oldest chimpanzee in history is into the 60s, I think. They do, but ordinarily that's about 40 for them, sometimes a bit longer. Finally, and this is a point that relates to this notion of female philopatry, which is something I asked you about on your primate assignment. Males are permanent members of many species' social groups, meaning that they stay in the group they grow up in. And that's what philopatry is asking you about. So on the assignment, I ask you if your species has female philopatry. And this can be the trickiest question on the assignment, actually, because finding out the meaning of philopatry is in itself a little bit difficult. But essentially, in primatology, or animal behavior in general, which is called ethology, oftentimes species have an evolved behavior to ensure that there's gene flow between groups, which is, of course, advantageous from an evolutionary perspective, whereby you've got a group and you've got males and females, and either one or the other will leave and go find another group when they reach sexual maturity. And the question is, which sex leaves and which sex stays? And that's what philopatric refers to. So the philopatric sex is the one that stays in the natal group. We haven't gone over this, right? Okay, so the philopatric sex stays in the natal group. Natal meaning the one it grows up in, N-A-T-A-L. Okay? So when I ask, does your species have female philopatry, what I'm asking is, do the females stay in the group and the males leave? Well, philopatry is kind of a technical term, so if you stick the name of your species, whatever it is, into Google, and you put in philopatry, you may get no hits, but that doesn't really tell you anything because you haven't found the answer. What you could look for that will make this a little bit easier to find is you can put in the name of your species. Wait, this is the bad one. You can put in the name of your species plus males disperse. Or if you have the row book, for example, and they say in the row book that males disperse, or if you find something to the effect of the social group of your macaque is built around a core of related females. You'll hear this a lot. The group is built around a core of related females. That means they have female philopatry because those females are staying in the group, and the males join. Okay? But that's how you can find this answer. It's a little tricky sometimes to find it with female philopatry in your species name. Yes?
Is it possible that both genders stay in the same group?
It is not generally the case that both genders stay in the group, but the pattern can get muddled, and sometimes both sexes leave. So if you have a solitary species, like an orangutan, okay? Are you having trouble seeing spelling?
Disperse, we saw that.
D-I-S-P-E-R-S-E, disperse. P-E-R-S-E. That's really what it says, I swear to God. This is why I type things out. Yeah. D-I-S-P-E, that's a R, S. That's great. It's really nice. I'm the teacher. Shut up. Yes, disperse. Disperse. Look for disperse. Okay, so yes, I do remember what I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted. Orangutans. Okay, so you've got a species like an orangutan that's solitary, right? And solitary means that males do their own thing, females do their own thing unless they have offspring, and then the offspring hangs out with them. It's only going to be a single offspring like this. So you have males, and then you have female offspring units. That's what solitary means. So if this is a female baby, it's going to grow up and go off on its own. If this is a male baby, it's going to grow up and go off on its own. Okay? So you would say that by my definition, this doesn't have female phylopatry because the baby, if it's a female or male, it doesn't matter, is not going to stay in the group. It's going to go off and be on its own because it's solitary, right? It may be slightly confusing for you because if you do the research on orangutans, do we have an orangutan? Okay, did you find this? Have you found this yet? Okay. When you do it, you may find somebody saying that your orangutan, whether it's Sumatran or Bornean, it doesn't really matter, has female phylopatry, and you'll be sort of like, well, why? Derek said a solitary species can't have phylopatry. What they're referring to would be that a daughter stays in the vicinity of the mother. Like she goes off on her own, but she stays close by. So sometimes they'll describe solitary species as being philopatric, even though the way we're defining it, they really can't be. If that's the case, you can put anything you want for that answer, and if I mark it wrong, say, hey, you told me I could put anything I want for this answer. But generally speaking, if you have a solitary creature, it's easiest just to say no, because from a narrower perspective, the term gets used in both ways by primatologists, but as it's defined narrowly, which is what I was doing over there on the board, the answer would have to be no, because everybody leaves the natal group to go somewhere, okay? But if you've got a social group, right, if you've got unimale, multi-female, or multi-male, multi-female, then you've got to sort of figure out whether or not what's going on here. And the real question is who stays in their group that they're born into and who leaves, okay? Everybody good? Okay. Primate learning and behavior is intimately related to their social life. The necessity of being smart, figuring things out, and being able to decide whether or not members of your group are friends or foes is, according to many scientists, one of the main things that drives the evolution of greater intelligence among primates, and in particular, ultimately, the human lineage. So what we end up with is a situation like this, where primates in general have large brains, and their large brains seem to be the way they best deal with these issues of building social networks. And finding food, of course, is a challenge as well that requires brain power, but also dealing with social life. So these are the relative sizes, or actually the absolute sizes of the brains. Macaque, small, of course, is a smaller creature, 100 grams or so. Orangutan and chimps are about 4 times that size, and then you're about 3+ times the size of a chimp. So these are just some comparative brain sizes. Brain size more frequently gets expressed as in cubic centimeters and not grams, but it's essentially the same measurement. A cubic centimeter is essentially a gram, so a human brain is 1,350 on average cubic centimeters as well in terms of its volume. All right, let's talk about social behavior. Here we go. I want that one. Recording that display. All right. With a few exceptions, studies of Japanese macaques started in the 1950s, but with a few exceptions, the knowledge of primate social behavior in natural contexts was very little understood, even for the great apes, all the way up until the 1970s, when Richard Leakey, who is a famous paleontologist that will come up again when we start talking about fossils, sent these 3 graduate students out individually to study great ape species in their natural environments in more detail. And in a certain sense, he couldn't have picked 3 better women. Now, why that is, I'll tell you in a minute. Do you know who these women are? Who do you know up here? Jane Goodall is which one? Top left. And this is with her species that she studies, chimps in an area called Gombe in Tanzania, okay, near the Kenyan border. Do you know either of the other 2 women? Do you know who this woman is? Sometimes one person knows who this is. What's that? It's the Gorillas in the Mist lady. I would give you top points for that since no one's gotten more specific. Her name's Dian Fossey, and the film Gorillas in the Mist, starring Sigourney Weaver, who is, I suppose, looks somewhat like her, is about her life. And did you see the movie? Have you seen it? Yeah. What happens in the end? Well, she's killed in the end. And her murder is to this day unsolved, although it's assumed that she was killed by poachers who kill gorillas for a variety of reasons. Local people will sometimes eat them, but they're also their body parts are exported for, some of them for a while would be used in like furniture. They'd be used to make lamps and things like this. There was kind of a gorilla hand lamp craze, but they're also, gorilla parts are also used like as medicine in certain parts of the world as well. So you can sell them for more money than you actually would save by eating them, if that makes sense. But you can eat part of them and sell the rest. Anyway, all 3 of these women, when they became researchers, also became environmentalists and fought for the preservation of the species that they work with, all of whom are, at least in parts of their range, endangered. Chimps are the most numerous. Mountain gorillas are what Dian Fossey worked with, and you can't see it very well in the picture, but they're a little bit smaller than the lowland gorillas, which are the ones you see at the zoo. We don't have mountain gorillas in the zoo. They also have longer fur. That's the easiest way to tell because they come from higher altitudes, which are colder. There's only a few hundred of them left. So every individual that was killed was sort of a devastating loss for that species. She studied them in Rwanda, and they live on the border of Rwanda, Burundi, and the Congo, which is very much a politically unstable region where huge numbers of immigrants have crossed the border because of conflicts in one country or the other. The Congo has been unstable and was a dictatorship for decades under Mobutu. He was deposed finally, and he was deposed. I don't know if you know much about African politics, but Mobutu was a dictator who basically ran Zaire, as it was called then, for many years, decades, and lived, quite wealthily. But his regime, which people considered virtually untoppable, right? He didn't think you could ever get rid of this guy, fell because of the huge numbers of immigrants that poured into the Congo from Rwanda after the genocide. So the instability in the region actually functioned to topple Mobutu's dictatorship. But there's been huge movements of people, and it's a very troubled region, and people need food, and people are poor, and if you need food and you're poor, you're going to hunt whatever's around. So it's been a battle to preserve species like the gorillas in that area. And Dian Fossey came out sort of very vociferously against poaching, and she founded a nonprofit organization named after one of her favorite gorillas who had been killed by a poacher called Digit. And Digit was killed by poachers, and then she created the Digit Fund and all this stuff. Well, the general hypothesis about her death is that she was killed by the poachers because they were angry at her, but her death is unsolved. Jane Goodall, and the third woman, whose name is Barote Galdakos, who works with orangutans, And she has family here in Los Angeles, so she comes back to Los Angeles and gives talks and such. She came to Glendale and gave a talk, and we had our students go. She's a kooky lady. She's kind of half crazy, which is fun. But they all have one thing in common, and that is that they actually like animals better than people. This is what it sort of takes to be a primatologist, because you're going to be sitting in the jungle with a bunch of animals for a very long time. So if you're somebody who really loves being around people, you're not going to see too many of them. Jane Goodall will tell you outright that she likes chimpanzees better than human beings, and that's really what it takes to do all three of these jobs. Jane Goodall is really nice and antisocial. Dian Fossey was kind of, at least by most people's accounts, at the end of her life, a really difficult person to get along with. Like, her own grad students detested her. And in fact, people jokingly say that maybe the grad students actually killed her. But there's a lot of people who have unfavorable things to say about her, which I'm not saying it's not horrible that she died, but and then Gal Dukas is just crazy. God love her. Yeah, so she came and gave a talk, and the kids all thought she was hilarious, and she was like, "I have 30 orangutans in my backyard right now." Right, and she has a preserve. She runs a like a nature preserve, a sanctuary for they're mostly former pets, but then some of them are orangutans that have been sort of dispossessed by deforestation to plant palm oil, which is the other big problem for them and the gibbons too. You'll hear about this weekend. So she has to sort of take care of them and take them on. And you can go travel to her. Her place is called Camp Leakey. But yeah, I think she's really great. And she's great in like a kooky way. Barute Gal Dukas. I can run on the board for you. You can look her up, yeah. Gal de G-A-L. Yes, that's a G. Gosh, I was trying to write it legibly, but let's see. How about that? What do you think? Better?
Yeah.
I used to have beautiful writing. All right, so there's those three women, and they were very much responsible for improving our understandings of these different creatures. All of them, you know, are part of like a sort of first wave of research, and now a great deal of, you know, additional research has kind of surpassed their various contributions. Gal Dukas still does research in the field, but her main thing is running her sanctuary. Fossey's dead, and Goodall is pretty much out there, you know, giving eco talks. She doesn't really do research per se anymore, although she goes back to Gombe, but she's not doing primarily research.
Any reason each choose the three female research students or not male?
They were the right people at the time. You know, there seems to be a relationship, without essentializing too much, there seems to be a relationship between women's mothering instincts and an ability to do primatology. I think women find primates compelling because they are, in some sense, like children. You'll see male primatologists in the film I show you, but it's a surprising fact that the majority of primatologists historically are female. The vast majority of primate pet owners are female too. 90% of chimps are owned by female Americans in the U.S. 90% are female owners that dress them up in baby clothes, which you're sort of stuck doing because you have to put diapers on your primates anyway, unless you can train them, which you can. But yeah, so chimps in baby clothes is sort of a female thing. I don't know. There are men, but yeah, that's all I can say. Okay, let's talk about primate social behavior now that I've essentially dug my own grave. There are costs and benefits to living in social groups. Like everything else, there's always a cost-benefit analysis. And it always revolves around the same themes. It's fairly easy to figure out. So the costs include competition for mates and resources. If you're a Melda, you can have Poppin taking the food right out of your mouth. Or If you're Brewster, you can have the alpha male and his team of goons cock-blocking you with the female that you're in love with. That's competition for mates and resources. Predators, of course, can see a group of primates more easily. And then the other problem with group life, which has been a problem for humans too, is that when you put lots of members of a species into a group together and they're all close by each other, they will pass diseases between one another more easily. That's slightly offset by the fact that primates are on the move, but that doesn't help too much. That was cool. Same thing, basically the same things also carry benefits. So the costs and the benefits are the same. There's just sort of a good side and a bad side to each of them. So while you have competition for mates, at least they're there, right? Talk to any deep sea fish about finding mates. It's a big challenge for them. That's why they do things like, evolve bioluminescence. So when they swim in the deep sea, they can not only see, it actually doesn't help them see that much. It helps them identify mates. It does draw prey to them. That's the other thing that it does. But, if you're an anglerfish, which is like the one in Nemo with the big teeth that almost eats them and has a little light that flips around. In several species of anglerfish, females are dimorphically larger and males are really small. And what happens is that when the female encounters the male in the deep sea, he bites onto the side of her and doesn't let go, and their tissues end up fusing together, and then he actually is fed from her blood supply and never eats again. And basically, he's nothing more than a little sperm packet that holds on to her for her whole life. And that's all he does, nothing other than that. And that's how they find mates. And once they find each other, he pretty much never lets go. It's a very dysfunctional relationship. Exactly the type of boyfriend you always wanted. But yeah, they've pulled up female anglerfish from the deep sea that literally have like 6 different males all attached to them, because she just keeps collecting them like a little harem. It's a gender role reversal. But basically, trying to find mates in the deep sea is really hard. It's much easier if you stick together. And there are a fair number of deep sea creatures that will do that, like fish that will stay together in schools, because one of the reasons to do it is it makes finding a mate easier when you couldn't find them otherwise. So that's good. So even if you're Brewster and the alpha male is chasing you away with his goon squad, you still can steal into the bushes and get a mating, right? And there are advantages. Reproduction is made easier. Finding food is easier too, because you have other members of your group to locate the food and you follow them. Okay. Resources easier to locate. And then of course for predators you can form anti-predator alliances, which you saw in the film as well. So yeah, there are costs and benefits. And basically what happens is that if you look at a group, there's going to be different selection pressures acting on group size, right? So you've got this group, and you might have a selection pressure on a larger group, larger over here, smaller on this side. So there's a selection pressure acting to make the group bigger, and that's predation. So you're a tiny little diurnal monkey, marmoset, and that puts you in a position of great vulnerability to predators because there's a fair number of things out there that can eat you. So if that's the case, that's going to create a selection pressure on a larger group, okay? But then there might be another selection pressure against that. Maybe the resources you consume are not available in such a large supply that you can support a huge group. Or those resources are dispersed, right? Fruit, for example, is often referred to as either a dispersed resource or a clumped resource, meaning that you'll find a little group of trees come into fruit at the same time in the jungle, but then after you eat that fruit and you want more food, you got to go find another clump of trees somewhere else a long way away, and you got to forage for it. You can't find it easily, right? So that means that you can't maintain a huge group, right, to find that food because you've got to split up to locate it, right? So different sorts of things can influence the size of a group, okay? There are 5 different types of groups. There are 5 different types of groups in general. We've talked a little bit about each of them. These are reviewed in your book, but let's just go over them quickly. Again, solitary is going to be males, the symbols for male and female, right? The male with a little arrow, the female with a little cross. In a solitary creature, you've got males who have a range that's shown with this blue line, and then you've got females who have a range shown with the red line. So the males have a range that encompasses the range of several different females and their offspring, okay? And he tries to sort of guard them, but if you're an orangutan, you're not going to be very good at this because the size of the territory is really huge and you're pretty slow. So another male can kind of get to one of your females, but you're going to try and chase him out of there, okay? Now, in wild, this area would be really big. So if you take creatures that live in an area that's really big, and males are used to defending this very large territory, mainly for resource reasons, but also for mating, and you put them into a zoo exhibit, it's not surprising that they're going to be really intolerant of each other because they're not used to being that close together. So males tend to be quite intolerant of each other in male orangutans in zoos. Monogamy is familiar to you. It's like little nuclear families, mom, dad, and the kids. Mom, dad, and the kids is like gibbons. You'll see mom, dad, and the kid groups this weekend. Then you've got the stranger, less familiar ones. There are 2 types of what's called polygyny, which is P-O-L-Y-G-Y-N-Y, all Y's, polygyny. And that means many females. In one type, there's a single male with a harem, one male, multiple females and their offspring. In the other, there's multiple males. So then you have 3 males down here. Couple of differences. Well, the main difference is that in order to have a multi-male group, the males have to tolerate each other, which sometimes they will not do, okay? But if they do, that means your overall group size is going to get bigger and bigger. So the truly big groups that you have for primates are always going to be polygyny multi-male, right? Or is it sometimes called multi-male, multi-female? It also goes by that name, okay? And you do find a pattern among some species, you may be running into this in your research, where a unimale polygynous group, where there's only a single male, can actually become larger and at different times of the year or in different parts of their geographic range. And that will happen because of resource availability. Basically, much as I can buy you off with a Krispy Kreme donut, so too can you get males to put aside their differences and get along if you feed them Krispy Kreme donuts or whatever it is they're looking for in the forest. So even orangutan males, for example, will tolerate each other when the fruiting forests of northern Sumatra come into fruiting season all at the same time, which happens every few years. And when that happens, all the orangutans come from a long way away, and you got this huge group of them hanging out and eating, and the males kind of just deal with it, right? But then when the food runs out, they get a little testy, they don't want to be around each other anymore, and everybody goes back their separate ways, okay? So basically, one of those things about learned flexible behavior that we talked about is that you don't always get exactly the same group composition. The composition of the group responds to resource availability. Okay, that means it can change during the year because sometimes more resources are available at different times in the year. Okay, sometimes the same species might be like this in the south and this in the north, or something like that, and it's all about resources. Yes. Okay, so then polyandry, poly means many, polygyny means many females, gyne like gynecologists, right? Polyandry means many males. And this is like marmosets and tamarins, where you have a single female here and then more than one male, and it's always 2. It doesn't get bigger than that. But that's the difference. So you have an extra male partner, and all of the polyandrous species, which include marmosets and tamarins exclusively, give birth to twins. And that's part of the reason why that system actually exists. This is the most unusual. Okay? Actually, the 2 strangest things on here from the perspective of the natural world are monogamy and polyandry. It's funny that we think of monogamy as normal because it's actually pretty freaky in the natural world, even for mammals. even for mammals. Here's a summary of that information. You don't have to write this all down if you sort of get the concepts. I just list some examples. So solitary individual males' territories overlap with female offspring units. Orangutans, mouse lemurs, galagos. It's basically orangutans and nocturnal prosimians. Okay, fit this pattern. Monogamous pairs, male-female pairs with offspring, gibbons, owl monkeys tend to follow this pattern too. There's one guenon. It's astonishing how few monogamous species there are. And remember, the reason for that is that the different reproductive strategies of males and females mean that it's quite a disadvantage to a male to be in a monogamous reproductive unit. Otherwise, he could be more reproductively successful by mating with multiple females. So he's, in some sense, I mean, it's not about conscious decisions, but he's not going to want that, if that makes sense, from an instinct level, not sort of like a conscious decision-making level, but he's not going to favor this. So how you get monogamous relationships in nature is a very interesting question. It's subject to different selection pressures, but even exactly why it's the norm for gibbons isn't really that clear. For humans, it has a lot to do with the dependency of our offspring. To some extent, that's true of gibbons too, but that's not all that's going on there. Palandrus, one female with multiple males and offspring, that's marmosets and tamarids we talked about, one male, multi-female, and then multi-male, multi-female. And this is basically similar, but it just depends on how many males you have. And the more males you have, the more females you have. Okay? So the really big groups are the ones at the bottom. Yes, sir? Yes. Yeah, theoretically, now that we have, like, you know, child care and, you know, anybody can take care of a kid. It's not easy to be a single parent, but you can do it, right? Theoretically, the reason why we have monogamy is because it took two parents to raise a kid because it's so demanding. Like birds, same deal, some songbirds. So that's the pressure that led it to happen. Well, theoretically now, you know, you can hire a nanny and go out and have 3 girlfriends or something, right? But that's not the way our culture is, if it makes sense. But yeah, in theory, yes, at this point, there's no reason why we have to keep monogamy, but people like romance and love and all that stuff. So I think monogamy is probably here to stay. There seems to be a worldwide trend toward it. So in societies where recently you had polygyny among humans, like a man might have more than one wife, that still happens in some places, but it's disappearing to some extent. It's getting replaced by romantic love. And part of that's, you know, the effect of like Christian missionaries and all kinds of other things, but you have a kind of tendency worldwide toward monogamous romantic love being the norm. But the reality for humans is that it's not a lifelong monogamy. Normal thing for humans is serial monogamy. Like you might have a relationship with someone for 5 years, and that's great. Then you break up and you have another one with somebody else. That's really the normal pattern. People like my parents who've been married for 50 years are not really normal, you know. Even though we talk about like how everybody wants that, right? That's really the ideal, right? So until death do you part, this they tell you when you get married. It's like, Christ, that freaks me out, you know. Just by saying that, it's like, are you kidding? Until death do I part? There's no way.
Would bonobos fit in the multi-male, multi-female?
Yes. Yeah, I didn't list them, but bonobos and chimps are down here. Bonobos and chimps are down here. You get a lot of baboons and macaques on both sides of this equation here. That's normal. In fact, this is the most common. These two are the most common social arrangements among primates. They're the most common. Now, so we talked a little bit about selection pressures. Here's some other examples. These are variables, or if you want to think of them as selection pressures, that influence the social structure of primates. So take the factor like metabolism. Smaller animals have higher metabolisms. That means they require energy-rich diets. Larger groups are harder to maintain unless you have lots of resources available. Okay? So having a high metabolism can mean that you shouldn't be in really big groups because there's this problem with feeding all the time. Okay? That's just one point to be made here. Resource type and distribution. Well, leaves are really abundant and can support large groups. So if you've evolved the ability to consume leaves, which in itself is somewhat unusual, a lot of animals can't, you can't, humans can't really live on leaves. But if you can, that'll support a large group because there's a lot of leaves available. Well, maybe not all leaves can be consumed. We learned in the film that not all leaves are equal in terms of food, as a, viability as a food. Fruits favor small group foraging because you kind of got to go out and find them, and they're dispersed, as we said. They're widely distributed, and insects are even more widely distributed, and they promote solitary foraging. So most insectivores forage by themselves, and they typically do it at night because insects are very active at night. Okay? High predation pressure equals larger groups. If a lot of stuff can eat you, marmoset, then you might have a larger group. But that larger group might be offset by your high metabolism, right? So there's different factors that come into play. And then dispersal can also play a role. The philopatric sex stays in the natal group, as we said, the other sex leaves. Male dispersal or female philopatry can lead to larger groups because males are intolerant of each other. So as female groups grow and grow and grow, males can join it, but that core of females makes up the large group itself, right? If you have it built around a core of males, the group can be intolerant of one another. Sometimes if males are the philopatric sex and they stay in their natal group, some of those males might be driven off in conflicts because males are less tolerant of each other, even if they're related. So really, it's groups that have a core of females that the group's built around that are the biggest, typically the biggest. So these are just, there's a whole lot of other factors that influence the social structure of a primate, the social group size, basically. But I just wanted to bring up a couple of relationships so you kind of understand. The study of the variables that influence social group size is what's called primate behavioral ecology, meaning that the ecology or the environmental factors, oftentimes having to do with feeding, directly influence the size of the group. Predation is important too, but feeding, resource distribution is very, very important. So we call it primate behavioral ecology. How does it influence primate group size and primate behavior? Now, you can also see, you didn't need to write all this down if you kind of get some of these general ideas. If you took a few notes here, it's fine. I'm not going to test you on this systematically, but they're just examples. Another good example of primate behavioral ecology has to do with the type of territorial defense you're willing to put into whatever your resources are that you eat. If resources are scarce, then primates will protect them, and they will patrol their boundaries and not allow the incursion into their territory of other groups. So each of the little colored blobs on this overhead represents like the territory of a group of a particular species. If your resources are scarce, you'll protect them, and the boundaries will be heavily patrolled. If resources are abundant, then the ranges can overlap without a lot of conflict because it's not worth it, right? It's always cost-benefit. Are you going to defend your resources against some other members of your species in a different group? Well, you better believe you will if you're a pygmy marmoset and you're eating gum off of a tree that you've been guarding for years, that your group has guarded for years. If you're a leaf eater, you're not going to care so much. You'll probably just start howling at dusk like howler monkeys do, but you're never really going to get up off your ass and fight with anyone because it's not worth it, right? So resources have a lot to do with what you're, if you think about it, it's absolutely true. If somebody tries to take something that's valuable from you, you're going to fight harder than you will if you just have something that's worthless and stolen. It doesn't matter so much. So, onward we go. Sex ratios, these are Cercopithecines, members of the group called Cercopithecinae, which are, generally speaking, African non-leaf eating monkeys. And what this shows is the number of females in the group from 0 to 30 plotted against the number of males in the group from 0 to 15. Now note, that you can get higher female totals in general because females are more tolerant of each other, okay, in general. But you do get multi-male groups, too, that have up to, almost 15 males. The point to understand here is that when you plot all these different species, these are all different species plotted for you, what you see is there's kind of a line here that slopes upward and reflects the fact that a single male, right, this bottom row of dots is all one male. Okay, so these are all unimale. One male can only defend a certain number of females before that group will break into parts and another male will come in. A male isn't capable among Cercopithecines of defending more than 10, and even that's rather unusual. So the groups that are unimale tend to be smaller. Okay, that's one thing to understand here. The other thing is that as the number of females increases in the group, so too does the males, because he can't defend this many. So basically the number of males is a function of the number of females. The more females you have, the more males you're going to have. So you can predict the number of males based on the number of females, essentially. But the number of females will generally always exceed the number of males, and that's because, of course, the males that aren't part of the group are sort of make up this bachelor group that runs around and tries to steal matings, and they try to survive until they can get strong enough to displace an alpha or something like this. Or they're trying to join groups, but when they try to join a group, the other males try to scare them away. Right? Think of it this way. If we were a group of primates in this room, okay, and let's say that we're female Philopatric, and the females in the room are all sisters and cousins and related to each other, right? And the males have all, sort of joined the group. At a certain point, what's going to happen is that another male is going to try to walk through that door and join this group. And when that happens, all of the males in the group are going to be like, this is our group, get away from our group, and we're going to gang up and chase that guy away, right? Which means that essentially you're always going to have these floater bachelor males who are out there drinking beer and watching football or whatever the hell they do, right? And the rest of us are not going to let them join because we don't want the competition, okay? It's not going to work the same way if we're male Philopatric, right? If we're a male Philopatric society and all the males in the room are cousins or brothers and the females have walked through the door, the males are going to be like, every new female that walks through the door, it's going to be like, yeah, this is great, right? And the females are going to probably tolerate each other to a certain extent. The only question is really how many females are going to walk through the door, right? So those are different factors because of the different reproductive strategies that males and females actually have. Yes? They can, yeah, which is what you saw with the baboon in the movie, where he sort of tries to join the group and he has to fight with the alpha. For the most part, what happens is that if we have a dominance hierarchy, just to take this example further, we have a dominance hierarchy, let's say you're the alpha male or whatever, you're the one who has the strongest interest in not allowing another male to walk through that door. The rest of us, who aren't at the top of the dominance hierarchy, maybe I'm Brewster and you won't let me mate with anyone anyway. I don't give a shit. I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to do anything for you. I'm going to lie there and eat a banana while you're trying to fight with the guy who's walking through the door. So it's simplistic to suggest that we would all band together and throw the new male out, because you and I might have very different interests in protecting our group from an incoming male. And that's sort of what can happen. So let's say you're the newcomer male, and he's the alpha. He doesn't want you here. I don't really care. Some other female might be interested in friending you because you might be able to help her with her baby or something. So it becomes about you having the intelligence to kind of stay away from the alpha and work your way into the group and get accepted. And that's kind of what we saw a little bit with that baboon segment in the film. It's not like you don't have a chance, right? Because, this isn't the jungle, and there's not only one door to walk through in the reality of a primate group, right? So you can avoid the alpha and kind of come around the back and start trying to make friends with other individuals. And maybe if I'm the alpha's rival, because, I'm next in line for the alone, but I need to defeat him. And what I'm doing is try to put together a coalition of buddies that can help me knock that guy off and take this troop over. I might be glad to see you because you can join my little gang and help me get rid of this guy, right? So everybody's got little different interests going on, and that's something that can work in your favor. So yeah, it plays out. It gets kind of complicated and interesting. It actually plays out. Okay? All right. Do we want to talk about testicles? Do I want to talk about this? Yeah, let's talk about this. All right. So as you know, we talked about dimorphism. I'll do 2 more slides and we'll call it a day. We talked about dimorphism. And remember that the main ways that primates are dimorphic is in terms of body size and canine length. And that's because canines are a weapon for males. So males tend to have larger canines, and males also tend to be larger in body size because of male-male conflict. But it distributes in quite a pronounced way depending on your social group. And we talked about this a little bit. Remember, we talked about elephant seals, and males are really huge because they live in this social structure where it's unimale and the male has a lot at stake. So canine size and body size dimorphism play out differently in different groups. Among my monogamous species, again, males don't fight that much over mates because if some male displaces you, you can go find another mate. There are plenty of them around, right? So males and females are roughly the same size is what this is showing, okay? So up the side of the graph, it's the male canine length divided by the female canine length, and here it's male body weight divided by female body weight, which means that if it's 1.0, males and females have equal-sized canines and equal-sized bodies, okay? And the taller, this is called a box and whiskers plot. It's a type of histogram. But the taller the bar, the more dimorphic they are for these 2 traits. So monogamous, not dimorphic at all, right? You do have dimorphism in the other 2. It's most pronounced in the 1 male, multi-female, which is shown in the cream color. You still have it in multi-male, multi-female, but it's not as pronounced. Why is that? Well, because there's more at stake here. Remember from the elephant seal example, the male that's the alpha for a unimale group has so much at stake that he needs to be big and badass. If you're in a multi-male group, yeah, the alpha is going to be more reproductively successful, but ultimately, you know, you have other mating opportunities if you're not the alpha. So it's good to be big and strong and have big teeth, but it's not as important as it is for the unimale groups, where it's an all-or-nothing game for the males, okay? Now you can compare that to my last slide, which basically compares the observed size of male testicles with the expected size of male testicles among 3 different social groups again. So a 1.0 on this box and whiskers plot would be that you have testicles that are about the size you would expect given the size of your body, okay? And what we find is that monogamists have smaller than expected because they basically mate guard and there's not that much competition at the level of gametes, meaning sperm competition as we called it. If you're in a multi-male, multi-female group, females are promiscuous and there's a great deal of competition at the gametic level, or what we called sperm competition, right? But, and this is our summary point for the day, kids, if you are a gorilla, you're going to be really big and badass, but you're going to have little teeny balls, because it's not going to matter if you produce a lot of sperm, provided you're alpha male and have chased off all the other males. In other words, your competition is going to happen at the physical level and not the gametic level, okay? These 2 slides have been all about the relationship between morphology and social group. And I will see you on Wednesday. I didn't do roll today, sorry. You're all here. It's true. It's not only funny, it's true. All right.